honored to be part of this forum. So I've been asked to speak about the challenges and opportunities which present themselves to people with disabilities or differently abled people. So I can, I think, vouch for it quite safely since I'm one of them. I am blind. I was not born blind. I started losing my sight 10 years ago. I'm a qualified medical doctor and a molecular virologist. So, COVID and viruses such as these are right up my alley of expertise. 10 years ago, I lost sight in one eye. 5 years following that, I lost sight in the other eye. 2014 is the last time that I resigned and let go of my official post in the field of my training and expertise. Since then, it took me a year to rehabilitate myself physically, mentally, emotionally, get back on my feet. I had reached literally rock bottom. From that point on, I had a choice either to claw my way back up or to let go of life quite literally. So I chose the former option. And I keep saying maybe the blessing for that was that I'm a mother and I had resolved not to let my children slip through the cracks while I was coming to terms with this new way of life that I had to adapt to. And since we play around with words, words are important because words evoke emotions, emotions charge us into activity. At times, prudence dictates inactivity. So another term for people like me would be people with diverse abilities. It's a journey from being somebody who's disabled to somebody who's considered to be differently able, and then one step further to acknowledge that people like me have diverse abilities. During this journey, I had to struggle to find expression because when I went blind, I was the only person I knew who could not see anymore. In that, I started writing. I created my blog, which is Sight Beyond Sight, after I made myself computer literate as a person with no sight. From that point onwards, I started writing and then hiking, and then there was an explosion of colors and images that were locked in my heart and mind, and they spilled over onto the canvas. And now I'm a professional artist, self-taught. The essence of this entire story is that this conversation, I would not like to be just about myself. I can be a referral or a reference point for people like me, and I would like to extend this conversation across the spectrum to people with all sorts of disabilities, all sorts of special needs. In my case, I'm a special needs parent. Uh, we are faced with the needs of special needs children, special needs parents, and we have to look at the society as a whole. So this conversation has to include people who have all their physical functionals and attributes working for them as well, to understand what is this journey about, how do we feel. Any person who loses any functional part of the body must remember that as long as the spirit is unbroken, there is nothing in the world that can stop you or hinder you in any way. But that first step of resolve has to come from within you. The inspiration, the motivation will be different from different people. The mourning and the grieving process for the loss of a functional part of one's body is also different for different people. I have been through bitterness, I have been through anger, I have been through a physical and a mental collapse. What I'm trying to say is that if you see me today where I am, this is not how the journey started. Anyone who is feeling any of the emotions of denial, of grief, of anger, should recognize it's okay to feel a certain way and it's okay to express your feelings. but your journey does not end there if you don't allow it to end there. I would like to talk about people who are hearing impaired, people who are amputees, people who have intellectual impairment, people who are just facing the basic challenge of lack of confidence or of mastering their anxiety, and also people who are born a certain way and people who fall victim to accidents or illness, as in my case, and then have to adapt to a very different way of life, which is beautiful nonetheless. It is different. Now, the challenges are umpteen. The challenges are our perception of the attitudes that people that we interact with. To this day, I have my good days and I have my not so good days. When I step out, I expose myself to perhaps ridicule, perhaps jeers, perhaps compassion not phrased appropriately, but along the way, I come across beautiful souls also that know how to connect with me and whom I can make comfortable enough to have a dialogue and a discourse with me. If I think of someone who is hearing impaired, for me, I can only imagine the challenge since I now rely wholly, solely, and first and foremost on my sense of hearing, my sense of touch, my sense of smell, and my sense of orientation to keep propelling me forward. For me to imagine a life of stony silence, deafening silence, is unimaginable. But I would like to start with myself, although I am not hearing impaired, but once I have mastered all the skills that I need to learn as a visually impaired person, the first thing I want to do is learn sign language because I have been a part of a beautiful organization that serves as a vocational training institute for ladies who with disabilities from completely impoverished background. And my experience that jolted me to the fact was that I entered a hall in which there were pockets of ladies grouped according to their description of disability. The visually challenged were grouped and huddled in one corner of the room, the hearing impaired were in another, the speech impaired were in another, the intellectually challenged or slow learners were in another. And I found something that was so glaringly obvious to me, but what I had to point out to others that why are the groups not communicating amongst themselves? So I want to stress this point that even amongst the different types and groups of people facing challenges in terms of disabilities or who are differently able, they themselves need to learn one another's skills to communicate with one another. And this opens the floor for people who don't have any obvious physical disability. A wheelchair is a very obvious symbol of a disability, a white cane, glasses, hearing aid, but there are invisible sign features, signs that need to be picked up that are under the radar. As I keep reiterating, basic issues as simple as lack of confidence, which can be an impediment to anybody's progress to sit through an interview, to hold a job. Another thing I want to stress is that in the current scenario, not just in our country, but globally, more or less, what we observe is that starting with children, primary schooling, secondary schooling, even higher level, there is a tendency towards exclusion where children or people with certain very specific groups of disabilities are grouped together and they are taught correctly certain skills or how to go about their learning or acquiring vocational skill. But then suddenly, after this very exclusive environment, comes a stage where they're suddenly thrust out there into society as a whole. When we talk about empowerment and opening up job opportunities, and then even for the employer and the candidate seeking employment, they are both at a non-plus because both have not had this milieu of interaction throughout. So then both groups need to be coached and need to be advised. So I see a lack of this in our current scenario. I would want to develop some sort of a setup where we could all join hands, where we could make this transition smoother, and we should emphasize the fact that we have to equip people with special needs with the skills they need, whether in terms of technology, whether it is adaptive technology, whether it is assistive technology, whether it is about gaining access, but we have to provide them with those tools for them to have a contributing factor to their workplace. If I think of a person with special needs, the first thing that comes to my mind is that since we have programmed our bodies to accomplish the same task as anybody else, or maybe far better than a person on average, in very different, innovative, unique ways, we have developed this skill of thinking out of the box, which would be, I think, critical for any CEO, any employer out there to be willing to employ people who have the ability to think out of the box. If I think of a hearing impaired person, the first thing that comes to my mind is that since they are not distracted by any surrounds noise or sound, their focus would be probably treble or tenfold as compared to an average person. We have to put an end to the stigma associated with disability, to the choice of words that we use. For example, if you speak of somebody being deaf, then the second word that's used is dumb, deaf and dumb. That word has to be scratched out of everybody's vocabulary. The only way it can be scratched out is if our mindsets change. To this, I have friends who drive, I have family members who drive. If I'm in the seat next to them, I think I've become so good at what I do that people at times forget now that I'm blind. I take that as a compliment. But in a moment of road rage, instinctively what they will say is that person blind that is driving, or she is driving such a way? And I laugh and say, no, blind people are not stupid enough to sit behind the wheel. We have to stop using labels as slurs. When I became blind, I had to readdress these issues. I had to snatch back the focus of the conversation from my disability to me as a person, what I was all about. Because suddenly everybody seemed to have a right to talk about me, open up my disability in a very negative way to all sorts of assessments, analysis, comments, and remarks. I had to learn to draw the line and bring the focus, shift it right back to my abilities. I see my blindness as a gift. I have no problem interchanging the words seeing or blind or observing, or whatever. If I had not lost my sight, I would never have been probably drawn to art. I would not have been able to trust people the way I do. I would not have been able to lose the prejudice and bias that I was also guilty of making the first visual perception and impression of a person, and then sticking to that, putting that person in a certain box, attaching a certain label to that person. Another fault that I'm guilty of before I lost sight was that if I came across on the road, in the street, in a room with a person with disability, I would feel compassion, but I would have no understanding. I would have all sorts of thoughts going through my mind. Maybe they are still running through uh, another person's mind who's not been exposed to disability, who have not had the privilege or opportunity of having their mindset changed. We judge, we cringe, we feel sorry, we feel fortunate, and that it's that person, not ourselves. But we all have to learn to be very aware of the space that we're in, If we enter a building, immediately sense, is there a ramp? If it's an elevator for people like me, is it equipped with AI? Are they talking buttons? Are there braille buttons? For people who are hearing impaired, are the visual signals all there? Are there any different tools that they need to guide them? People with wheelchairs, in wheelchairs, um, I have developed this understanding now that if I'm addressing a person in a wheelchair, I need to kneel down and seat myself beside that person rather than towering above that person and looking down at that person while I'm speaking to them. I have good experiences, bad experiences, even out of compassion. I would welcome interaction. I would welcome people to come up to me and ask me if there's any assistance that I require rather than having quite literally my cane snatched from me and me being tugged behind it or my arm yanked without my permission and me being hauled a certain way. Or I have had people come up to me, voice or mouth their names quite loudly and slowly right in my face, and then I have to tell them I'm blind, not hearing impaired. There's an etiquette, as there is in life in general. There is an etiquette how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive other people, how we interact with them. If I think of amputees and I think of the brilliant advances in prosthesis nowadays. You have carbon fiber technology, you have 3D printers designing prosthetics. A prosthetic is designed for speed and mobility. Human muscle is prone to exhaustion and fatigue, as we know. I mean, the scope is endless. We're not just talking Paralympics here. You have prostheses now that are designed according to the hind leg based on the design of a cheetah. If we look at nature, nature is tuned for diversity. Nature welcomes diversity. So should we. No two fingerprints are the same. No two paw prints of two tigers are the same. The stripes are different. Why should humans all be the same? Even if globally, nationally, internationally, well, even if persons with special needs count up to 2% of a general population, that 2% counts. Every individual counts. My voice counts, so does another person. Let's all put our heads together. Let's help one another build a structure. If we think of building a tower, let's also focus on building a team. So we help one another and we grow together. There are certain things that we as adults need to unlearn. There are certain things we need to learn from our children. We are in such a hurry to teach our children and program their brains to be little adults and grow up so fast. I think we need to, every one of us, an adult needs to take a step back and tune and hone into that instinct that a child has, that courage that a child has, that simplicity of thought that a child has. If you look at psychological models that were formulated in 1947 and thereabouts 1945, even if you go back further, you'll come across simple models like a candle and a box with pins in it. And people have been asked time and time again, and this model applies now also, that figure out a way of lighting this candle and attaching it to a wall in a way that the wax doesn't melt down onto a table. A child will probably be the first one to figure out that the box in which the pins are can use as a stand and then tab it to a wall. And if you think of ask an average adult to think of the option, they'll be perplexed because they'll just probably zero in on the candle and the tabs and not think of the boxes because the box is not mentioned. The same way, in another note, if you look at magicians, it's all about cognitive thinking and how you approach a problem. The best magicians will offer you the simplest of tricks, and the solutions will be right there, literally right under our noses. A child will figure it out. For example, a lady suspended in the air, that you will have children screaming in the audience. I've had my children ruining every magic show and a birthday party, picking out the tricks and working out how it works, that there are strings attached, and which are holding the person up, whereas an adult may argue and want to look at the complicated way of, no, the string will not be strong enough, no, there must be some other mechanism involved, and so on and so forth. So these are everyday, common day practices of things that we need to think about. Sometimes when I think of my life, um, and I think of people who to date, this day, have questions about whether I have honestly lost sight or not. At times it hurts, at times I can laugh it off. 1 a.m. when I'm making tea or coffee for myself, sometimes I'm having a sleepless night. Um, and if I'm lost in thoughts, because I lie primarily on my mind being programmed, I have to be mentally alert every step of the way. If I have my mug upside down on a counter and I'm pouring boiling water over it and I hear the water spilling all around the mug and I'm jolted out of my daydreaming, and that's when sometimes it hits me, where are all those people who sort of question me having lost sight or not? They should be here now to witness this. Or if I've had a breakdown, if I've had the luxury of a breakdown, it's been at 3 a.m. in the privacy of my washroom or my room, out of hearing of all the ones that I love. That has made me stronger. Every step of the way, you're stronger. But you have good days, you have bad days. And since we are born, we are presented with averages, whether it's a measurement of our heights, our weights, a salary package that we should have, a certain lifestyle that we should have. And I think it's time we focus on ourselves. We take it slow, put in a slow and consistent effort, even when it comes to our everyday lives. Set challenges, tasks for ourselves, achieve them, set the bar higher, move on to the next level, rather than focusing on what the other person has achieved, what's the other person doing, what is expected of me. As long as the spirit is alive, the dignity is there, the will is there. I see no reason why we cannot break any glass ceiling that there may be, why we cannot push boundaries, why we cannot rewrite our narrative. I thank you for your attention. I would welcome any questions if there are any, or if there's
Thank
anything
you
that I
so
may
much.
have
Thank you so
overlooked.
much, Zarina. This is such a, it's always amazing seeing you. It's always amazing hearing from you. और इतनी खुशी होती है. You're so full of positivity. आप challenges से गुजर कर अल्लाह ने आपको जिस जगह पर पहुंचाया और इंशाल्लाह अल्लाह ताला आगे भी आपको जिस तरह की कामयाबियां देंगे, you will be a source of inspiration for others like you. और मुझे खुद भी ऐसे लगता है हमेशा ज़िंदगी में कि अल्लाह ताला जिस भी हमें मरहले से गुजारते हैं ज़िंदगी के, इसलिए गुजारते हैं ताकि हम उससे अपने लिए भी सीखें और हम खुद उससे निकलने वाले बने और हम दूसरों को भी उससे निकालने वाले बने. सो द होल पॉइंट ऑफ हैविंग यू गो थ्रू दिस जर्नी, बिकॉज ज़्यादातर लोग ऐसे होते हैं जो बाय बर्थ देख नहीं पा रहे होते हैं. सो वो वाले काम नहीं कर सकते हैं और वो रिलेट नहीं कर पाते हैं जिस तरह आप कर सकती हैं. इसी तरह से जो बाय बर्थ सुन नहीं पा रहे हैं वो काम नहीं कर पाएंगे या उस तरह रिलेट नहीं कर पाएंगे. मतलब यू सीन बोथ द वर्ल्ड्स. सो जो कंपैरिजन आपके ज़हन में, जो एनालिसिस आपके ज़हन में, जो चैलेंजेस आप आइडेंटिफाई कर सकती हैं, वो प्रॉबेबली किसी और के लिए पॉसिबल नहीं था. और स्किलर्स के इस इंस्टीट्यूशन में मैं आपको ये पूरी एक दिल से ये ऑफर दूंगी कि आप जो भी प्लान करती हैं फॉर द डिफरेंटली एबल्ड, फॉर द डाइवर्सली एबल्ड, आप वो प्रपोजल लाएं, आप हम उस प्रपोजल को रिफाइन करते हैं एंड दिस स्टेज इज योर्स. आप शुरू करें इससे काम. इससे अच्छी क्या बात होगी कि घर के कंफर्ट में बैठकर हम आराम के साथ जो है वो लोगों को कुछ ना कुछ सिखा सकते हो. इट वुड बी एन ऑनर एंड अ प्लेयर. और इसका मकसद ही यही है, जहां हमने स्किल बिल्डिंग, हमारे लिए सब एक जैसे हैं, वी नीड टू फॉर्म इंक्लूसिव सोसाइटीज. हम बहुत ही सेग्रीगेटेड स्पेसेस के अंदर रहते हैं. हम एक दूसरे को एलियनेट करते हैं, हम घरों के अंदर भी एक दूसरे से अलग रहते हैं। हम घरों के बाहर भी ऐसे ही होते हैं, इंस्टीट्यूशंस के अंदर भी मुझे लगता है कि हम ग्रुप्स बना लेते हैं और हम उसमें लोगों को मार्जिनलाइज कर देते हैं, लोगों को उसमें से निकाल देते हैं, बाहर रखते हैं। तो ये बेसिकली माइंडसेट्स की बात है, हमें ये माइंडसेट्स चेंज करने हैं, हमें अपने दिल में भी जगह बनानी है और हमें अपनी स्पेसेस में भी एक्चुअली जगह बनानी है। एंड एज अ सोशियोलॉजिस्ट मुझे भी ये बहुत ज़्यादा महसूस होता था कि हमारे यहाँ कहीं पर भी कोई इंक्लूसिव स्पेस नहीं है। इफ़ वी रियली मीन टू हैव इंक्लूसिव स्पेसेस, फिर हमारे यहाँ रैम्प्स नजर आने चाहिए, फिर हमारे यहाँ जैसे आप कह रही हैं आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस से लिंक्ड चीज़ें नजर आनी चाहिए। और अगर कुछ भी ना होना जरीना, मैं कहती हूँ कि एक एम्पथेटिक हार्ट, एक एम्पथेटिक माइंड, अल्लामा इकबाल कहते हैं ना, दर्द दिल के वास्ते पैदा किया इंसान को, वरना तात के लिए कुछ कम ना थे करो बयां। तो ये जो दर्द दिल पैदा करना है, अगर ये हमारे दिलों में पैदा हो जाए तो और क्या चाहिए। तो इसकी भी कमी लगती है मुझे तो, ऑनेस्टली स्पीकिंग। आई हैव मेट मेनी डिफरेंटली एबल्ड पीपल, पता नहीं अल्लाह ताला खुद ब खुद मिलाते रहते हैं उनको मेरे साथ, और मुझे अच्छा लगता है बहुत ज़्यादा। तो इंशाल्लाह दिस अपॉर्चुनिटी इज एन अपॉर्चुनिटी फॉर अस। इंशाल्लाह जितने बच्चे आज हमें देख रहे हैं और जितने इसके बाद भी इंशाल्लाह देखेंगे और गेट कनेक्टेड विद अस, वी आर गोइंग टू वर्क ऑन इंक्लूसिव एजुकेशन एज पार्ट ऑफ आवर मिशन। तो प्लीज द हाउस इज ओपन फॉर क्वेश्चंस, फॉर कमेंट्स। आप जरूर कमेंट्स कीजिए, बताइए। ये मैं यहाँ पे जरीना साथ साथ आपकी ना कुछ तस्वीरें भी शेयर कर रही हूँ। मैं बहुत प्रेजेंटेशन तो नहीं बना पाई थी, लेकिन
Can I invite my son just to
yes, yes, that would be so wonderful. That would be so wonderful. We'd love to see him.
if there's anything on the screen, which
Screen
brings me to
share
the
option
point,
है.
like the news channels, it's very encouraging. Now we have ticker tapes running while the news is being read out. If we could also have a small box in a corner where signing is happening while the news or any other constant program, which doesn't alter much, there should be a little window in there for sign language also, for people who are hearing impaired or visually impaired.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm noting down everything you're saying, or
And
inshallah we will be working on it.
schools, when let's open up a dialogue about our education system and schools, because in my experience, every case is not the same. There are very rare beacons of hope also, but there should be more of them. In my experience, what I have observed and experienced is that when we talk of inclusion in the classroom, when I'm talking of special learners, learners who are, learn differently, or if I talk of dyslexia or autism, I invariably find that everybody is very sort of happy, patting themselves on the shoulder by welcoming or admitting that child or a teenager or an adolescent into their learning space, but then doing very little about it after that point.
That is
About
also a sad
providing
thing.
them the time, the skill, that extra little bit attention. That speaking of autism, I would also like to point out that there are firms, there are companies in Europe, especially architectural companies who deal with architecture, which specifically their HR companies are on a talent hunt, and they are specifically look out for people who are qualified but who have autism, because autism in those individuals gives them such a unique perspective which majority have missed out upon. So what is considered, and when we talk of special needs or people with disability or with diverse abilities, I want to now see a middle ground. Not pity, not sympathy, not exaltation and superhero status either. Middle of the ground way of life. We are not broken, so our disability needn't be fixed. Then there's a spectrum. There's a level even in visual impairment, in hearing impairment, in mobility, that sometimes after physiotherapy crutches work, they help you get out of your wheelchair. There will be hearing aids or cochlear implants which may give some sort of rehabilitation in terms of hearing. There are others who cannot avail of that. My site cannot come back, but there are other gadgets out there which I'm bringing in, working closely with the government, magnifiers, scanners, text-to-speech readers, which will open up this space for professionals and students who are visually impaired, who can use this technology to move forward. But we have to concentrate and focus and reiterate that our disabilities are challenges which offer opportunities for us, which is something that we learn to do. It's not.
Okay, please continue. Zarina, there's a question. I think there's a hand raised. Should I take it? Brigadier
Please do.
Mohammed Amin Saab, he has his hand raised. If you could unmute yourself and please ask the question. Sir, would you like to ask the question? I think there's some problem with his audio, perhaps. Okay, आप प्लीज कंटिन्यू करें या कोई और का क्वेश्चंस पूछना चाहे, कोई बात करना चाहे, जरूर करें. आप अपनी बात कंप्लीट कर रही थी और बेटा आपका कुछ हमें दिखाने लगा था, I think. Was he going to show us something on screen share?
I was going to ask him that if a question pops up in a typed format.
Okay, I will be reading that.
So
I will be reading that
out.
Okay, there are many beautiful comments for you. Okay. आपकी पेंटिंग्स की तारीफें हो रही हैं, आपकी तारीफें हो रही हैं. Wonderful paintings, Ma'am Zarina. Your paintings are very colorful and charming, like you. और मुख्तलिफ पिक्चर्स की सब. Everybody is very happy to see you actually, क्योंकि हम तो छोटी-छोटी परेशानियों में बहुत शायद परेशान हो जाते हैं. It's good to see such strong and brave women like you. और आप जो कुछ भी काम करना चाह रही हैं, जिन प्रोजेक्ट्स पे आप आगे बढ़ना चाह रही हैं, आई एम श्योर कि उनके लिए आप यू विल फाइंड वेज. और जैसा आप कह रही हैं, वी नीड अ लॉट ऑफ रिसर्च एंड वी नीड टू हैव ये कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव चीज़ें हमारे पास मौजूद हों, बिकॉज देर आर थिंग्स दैट कैन बी डन, लेकिन हमारे बहुत सारे ऐसे लोग हैं जो कि उनको अफोर्ड ना कर पाएँ शायद, या उनकी अफोर्डेबिलिटीज़ बहुत लो हों, तो उनके लिए हमें कॉस्ट इफेक्टिव चीज़ें करनी है और उनके लिए हमें चीज़ें अवेलेबल बनानी है एट चीपर कॉस्ट. तो इसमें हमारे रिसर्चर्स, आप तो खुद मेडिकल की फील्ड से हैं, तो वो काफ़ी काम कर सकते हैं, आई थिंक.
वो भी एंड पब्लिक बिल्कुल. अब जैसे जिन गैजेट्स की मैं बात कर रही थी, दे आर वेरी कॉस्टली. $5,000, $2,000 they cost, magar I am setting it up in the National Library, so it will be a resource center of sorts where people can come and avail of them. मैं blindness की ज़्यादा बात इसलिए करती हूँ, not because anything is far more important or less important than anything else, but because I personally am on this journey. तो मुझे ज़रा I'm ज़्यादा well versed with regard to blindness. And another thing that I would like to point out here is that like when it happened to me in my mid-30s. So abhi, like I'm pushing 50, it's been a long journey, but it happened to me at a time when I thought कि मेरे बच्चे अब संभल गए हैं, मैं अब अपना करियर दोबारा जिस ट्रैक पे ले जाना चाह रही थी वहाँ ले जाऊंगी. From being a viral genetist, splitting the RNA, DNA of viruses reduced to a point where I just can literally not see. And that's why my first article, उसका title है Learning to be Literate Again. जब मैंने कांटा छुरी इस्तेमाल करना दोबारा सीखा, चलना, फिर मैं सब कुछ दोबारा सीखा. It was like a rebirth for me. So at that time, for me, learning Braille was not a priority because मेरे बच्चे स्कूल में to acquire skills and tools which would make that all accessible to me rather than me learning a new language at that time and teaching it to everybody around me. दूसरी बात that we don't consider the psychological impact that a trauma like this has on people, especially when it happens to them in adolescence or middle age or later. If they're not born with it. Again, I'm not saying one is less important than the other. I know of a case last winter, tragically, I got to know of a student who was in a private school of this city where I am, Islam, who was losing sight, and at one point he was told he or she, I will not go to school because please go now to a low vision school or a blind school. We cannot accommodate you anymore. That student, unfortunately, thought suicide was the only answer and committed suicide. I know of adults who used to drive, who have been hit by glaucoma, who can afford to, but will not hire a chauffeur or be driven by anybody because their ego and their acceptance level is not there. They would rather wilt away in a darkened room because they can't accept the change in their life and move forward. I used to read ऐसे कि नामा होता था और पढ़ते पढ़ते मैं सो जाती थी मैं मेरी आंख भी खुल जाती थी वो चश्मे से तो मुझे 6x6 नजर आ रहा होता था मुझे तो भूल भी जाता था कि मेरी तो नजर खराब है अभी ये है कि आई स्विच टू ऑडियो बुक्स मुझे इतना ही so any questions? Yeah, it's time for the next session or what's
आप लोग प्लीज क्वेश्चंस हैं तो डायरेक्टली अपने आप को अनम्यूट कीजिएगा. Go ahead and ask questions.
You want to say hello?
अस्सलाम वालेकुम बेटे.
You've been spotted.
You've been spotted.
Well, अभी in his A levels he produced a picture perfect result. ये भी सवाल होता है मेरे बच्चे पढ़ते हैं हाजी बहुत अच्छा पढ़ते हैं.
माशाल्लाह माशाल्लाह.
4 A stars and an A, all sciences and math. Very proud of him.
हाँ, we are all proud of him. माशाल्लाह, बहुत ही खुशी होती है. और बाकी दोनों बच्चे आपके वो क्या कर रहे हैं?
वो जी एक अभी grade 6 में जाएगा starting Monday, एक grade 4 में. So I have one entering middle school, one who's just left high school, one who's in still primary school. So it's been quite a journey.
Okay, so you have a very diverse experience in this also.
Yes.
जरीना, आपकी फॉर वे फॉरवर्ड क्या सजेशंस होंगी? आपने ऑलरेडी बहुत सारी दी हैं, मैंने नोट डाउन भी किए हैं, पहले भी आपसे इस बारे में बात होती रहती है. तो जो प्रैक्टिकल चीज़ें हो सकती हैं वो इंशाल्लाह अल्लाह हमें मौका दे, हम एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में किसी वक्त इन्फ्लुएंस कर सकते हैं और हम वहाँ ये सजेशंस दें. लेकिन जस्ट फॉर माइंडसेट्स के लिए हमें क्या करना होगा? एज अ सोशियोलॉजिस्ट आई लाइक टू नो कि हम कैसे ऐसी सोशल अवेयरनेस कैंपेन्स बिल्ड करें, कैसे लोगों के अंदर एम्पैथी और एक दूसरे का ख्याल करना, इसकी कैसे हम एक पैदा करें एक सोच.
जी मैं तो ये कहूँगी कि जिस को ज़ाती तौर पे पर्सनली ये इश्यूज छू के गुजरे हैं, दे आर मोर अलाइव टू इट, whether they have friends या family members. Like in my case, I'm a parent, तो मेरे बच्चे साथ साथ सीख गए हैं रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी एंड कंपैशन. बहुत छोटी उम्र से इनको मैंने कोशिश की कि जितने इंडिपेंडेंट हो जाएं, नाखून काटना, खुद नहाना, जो भी इनके लिए बेहतर था मेरे नज़र में. तो एक तो ये है कि हम जब आपस में जो इस मरहले से गुजरे हैं, जो पेरेंट्स हैं या के बच्चे को फैमिली मेम्बर्स हैं जो भी, तो हम इकट्ठे फोरम बनाएं एंड अपने जहाँ तक हो सके स्कूल में, वर्कफोर्स में, सोशल मीडिया कर भी रहे हैं. यू आर डूइंग अ ट्रेमेंडस पुटिंग इन एन एफर्ट also to keep talking about these things. And दूसरा the important key is with our own attitudes. जैसे मैं कहूँ कि शुरू में अगर मैं छोटी सी मिसाल दूँ, जब मेरे साथ ये हुआ हादसा, तो यही जो बड़ा बेटा उस वक्त मेरे कितने साल का था, अभी माशाल्लाह 18 को हो जाएगा नवंबर में. ही वाज हार्डली 7-8 साल का था जब ये हुआ सारा कुछ. तो मुझे खुद मैं बुखला गई, नहीं समझ आती थी कि पेरेंट टीचर मीटिंग अब कैसे करनी है, या जो स्कूल के गैदरिंग्स होते हैं, फंक्शंस होते हैं. तो मुझे बहुत याद है कि मैं खुद किनारे को हो जाती थी, इसको भी कहती थी साइड की कुर्सी मुझे ढूंढ दो. और वो फिर मैंने सोचा कि नहीं, ये पहल मैंने करनी है. मैं जिस एक दिन उठ के मैंने कोई आवाज़ जो रिकग्नाइज की, मैं जहाँ मुझे महसूस होंगे कि लोग हैं, ग्रुप है, मैं भी आगे जाऊंगी, सलाम दुआ करूंगी. जो मुझे जानता होगा वो कहेगा कि भाई, मतलब दूसरे तरीके से मिलेगा. जो नहीं जानता होगा वो मुझे इंट्रोड्यूस कराएगा. उस वक्त मेरी हेयरिंग और ये चीज़ें तो इतने अक्यूट नहीं थे, मैं सब सीख रही थी. तो मेरे ख्याल में ये हम पे भी डिपेंड करता है कि हम खुद कैसे अपने आप को कैरी करते हैं, कैसे इंटरेक्ट करते हैं, अगले को क्या कॉन्फिडेंस देते हैं कि वो आए, झिझक नहीं करें, हमसे सवाल पूछें, हमसे बातचीत करें. और उनको भी हम ये सिखाएं. एंड जहाँ हम ऑफेंड हो, सो वी शुड से इट. फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ आई एम गोइंग टू बी कॉम्प्लीमेंटेड ऑन बीइंग आउट एंड अबाउट, तो आई विल टेक दैट एज अ कॉम्प्लीमेंट. उसके साथ अगर सफिक्स कोई लगाएगा, but since you are doing this although you are blind, then I will take umbrage to that suffix. कि ये मेरे साथ ये जो है ना जुमला आप ना जोड़ें. टेक मी फॉर व्हाट आई एम. So I think it works both ways. We should write about it, we should speak about it, we should conduct talks, go into the workplace, talk to the organization heads, whether it's a bank or an office or a workplace, for them to be receptive, more attuned to the whole process. अच्छा, मेरे अजीब अजीब तजुर्बे होते हैं, एक्सपीरियंसेस. कभी कभार तो जिन लोगों से मैं एक्सपेक्ट करूं कि ये किसी पढ़ लिख के किसी पोस्ट पे बैठे हैं, इनको शऊर होगा, उधर से मैं अक्सर चौंक के, मतलब मायूसी, अजीब बौखला जाती हूँ कि ये कैसा एटीट्यूड है. एज अपोज टू अगर एक गार्ड है, फॉर एग्जांपल टिकटिंग ऑफिस के बाहर या किसी दफ्तर जहाँ वो मेटल डिटेक्टर फ्रेम है, उनसे मैं शायद ना एक्सपेक्ट करूं कि इनको इतने अवेयरनेस या शऊर होगा. Those people surprise me so beautifully कि if they see me approaching or heading straight at the metal detector, पूरा फ्रेम उठा के कभी साइड को कर देंगे. As opposed to अगर मैं आगे जाऊं जहाँ काउंटर है और जहाँ I would expect a different sort of interaction, there I'd be disappointed surprisingly. So I think we have to keep chipping away at it. ये मगर just because I feel कि change तो आ रहा है, that I can tell you for sure. The fact that we have these forums, we're talking about them, we have an audience who is taking notes, who's attentive, who is encouraging this dialogue. Even in our interactions on the street, me personally, there are bad ones, there are good ones. Also, it depends what frame of mind I'm in, also how I take it. कोई तो जिद में होगा कि अपना चश्मा मुझे पकड़ा दे कि इसको आप इस्तेमाल करें, तो इतना आसान हल मैंने नहीं सोचा. ऐसे भी होगा अगर मैं चल रही हूँ, गाड़ी से उतरूँ, ऑल इज़ वेल, सफ़ेद छड़ी देख के मेरे कदम अनजान जगह में मेरे कदम लड़खड़ाएंगे. प्लेसेस दैट आई मेमोराइज्ड, वेयर आई मैप्ड आउट, उधर मुझे ना छड़ी की ज़रूरत है, आई एम वॉकिंग कॉन्फिडेंटली. मगर मतलब आपको सूरतें भी सुनने में आएंगी, वो तर्स वाले अल्फाज भी आएंगे सुनने में. सो ऐसे कभी तो रद्द कर देती हूँ, कभी इग्नोर कर लेती हूँ. आई थिंक it's a multi-dimension. In our ads, in our TV programs, I think ये issue, an impact what could have is that अक्सर अगर पोलियो का ad है, so you have with special needs in not a very favorable light. So I think it has to be a cohesive, coherent, joint effort in so many levels to get out of this trap.
अच्छा जरीना, आपने बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग बात कही है, जो कि मेरा ख्याल है कि बहुत से लोगों ने इस डायमेंशन से पहले नहीं देखा होगा, और इस पे मैं कोशिश करूंगी
जी
आपके साथ और लोगों के साथ मिलकर कुछ लिखने की, काम करने की। ये जाहिर बात है, जब एक कोई भी एबिलिटी, एक कोई भी हिस्स इंसान की सेंसेस में से कम हो जाती है, तो वो दूसरी और शार्पन हो जाती हैं। तो उनको हम कैसे इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं? जैसे
जी
आपने बात की है कि क्रिएटिविटी बढ़ जाती है, थिंकिंग आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स बढ़ जाती है, दिस इज सो ट्रू, दीज आर द स्किल्स दैट आर रिक्वायर्ड इन वर्कफोर्स ऑफ टुडे। तो क्या ऐसा किया जा सकता है, कैसी स्किल्स,
यस
कैसी इक्विप हम कर सकते हैं अपने डाइवर्सली एबल्ड लोगों को कि वो इस वर्कफोर्स का हिस्सा बने? और पोस्ट कोविड तो हमें, मुझे लग रहा है, बहुत ज़्यादा इसमें अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ मिलेंगी। तो ये एक एरिया है जो कि बिल्कुल नया है और इस पे काम होना चाहिए, मतलब अनएक्सप्लोर्ड है, अगर नया
जी
नहीं भी है तो। There's a question that somebody wants to
जी
ask you, and it's related to those who are mentally
जी
disabled by birth. वो कोई पूछ रहा है कि can you guide about those?
जी what sort of can I ask specific? Are we talking of cerebral palsy? Are we talking of a low IQ?
Maha, आप
Can
बताना
I have
चाहेंगी,
certain
because she's
specific?
just written that guide about those who are mentally disabled, I mean abnormal by birth. So would you kindly specify, and we all need, जो आपको लैंग्वेज
It's a
कोचिंग
very
भी करनी
vague.
पड़ेगी जरीना, मुझे लगता है कि हमें अपने अल्फाज के
जी
भी
नहीं,
चुनाव जो है,
इसी तरह वी विल इनकरेज। हाँ जी, हम सजेशंस देंगे, कुछ हम सीखेंगे,
इंशाल्लाह,
कुछ हम सिखाएंगे। तो
इंशाल्लाह।
जो अगर ज़्यादा पर्सनल ना हो, कैन हैव स्पेसिफिक्स प्लीज।
Okay, Maha, would you like to give the specifics for this question, please? Could you unmute yourself, Maha, and give
अदरवाइज आई
specifics?
आंसर इन अ जनरल,
आप मेरा ख्याल है कि
और आई
जनरलाइज्ड वे में उसको
आंसर इन
जेनेरिक
जनरल।
आंसर दे दें।
अच्छा, अब अगर हम सेरिब्रल पॉलिसी की बात करें, सीपी, सेरिब्रल पॉलिसी इज ऑलवेज एन एक्सीडेंट,
अस्सलाम
मोस्टली
वालेकुम।
एट बर्थ। जी
जी जी, गो अहेड
सलाम।
माँ।
आज
जी जी, पूछिएगा आप।
जी, मैं सिर्फ पूछना चाह रही थी कि आपने मतलब पूछा कि कौन सी टाइप, मुझे एक्चुअली वो एग्जैक्टली पता तो नहीं है, लेकिन मतलब बाय बर्थ मेंटली डिसेबल इस तरह से नॉट टोटली, मतलब वो समझ सकती हैं चीज़ों को, फील कर सकती हैं, देखती हैं, लेकिन जज नहीं कर पाती, मतलब व्हाट इज राइट एंड व्हाट इज रॉन्ग। बस आई डोंट नो कि इसमें मेडिकली इसमें कौन सी टर्म यूज होती है, तो इफ आई कैन एक्सप्लेन।
अब मैं थोड़ी जनरल बात करके कुछ जो है आइडेंटिफाई कर लूँ मार्कर्स, अगर कुछ फिट होता है आपके सिनारियो में तो ठीक, अगर फिर भी नहीं तो प्लीज आस्क अगेन इफ इट्स स्टिल नॉट, इफ आई एम नॉट एड्रेसिंग द पॉइंट। अब जैसे मैं सेरिब्रल पॉलिसी की बात कर रही थी, ये अक्सर डिलीवरी के टाइम पे मेस्ड अप डिलीवरीज एट बर्थ जो होते हैं, सो दे रिजल्ट इन दीज एक्सीडेंट्स, forceps births होते हैं, या any other where the doctor seems to have unfortunately gone wrong, और जो न्यूबॉर्न है उसके स्कल पे या ब्रेन को थोड़ी इंजरी होती है, तो उसमें डिफरेंट लेवल्स हैं। अगेन इट्स अ स्पेक्ट्रम, दिस इज नॉट समथिंग जेनेटिक, दिस इज नॉट समथिंग कैचिंग, it sadly unfortunately at times happens, should not but happens, and उससे उस बच्चे की पूरी जिंदगी जो है एक नया रुख लेती है। इसमें भी अब डिग्रीज हैं, there are levels when the child is severely physically and mentally handicapped, or there are levels where other cognitive functional functions are all there, वो बात भी कर सकते हैं, वो समझ भी सकते हैं, मगर अनकंट्रोलेबल शेकिंग होती है, अनकंट्रोलेबल ट्रेमर्स होते हैं। फिर ऐसे केसेस होते हैं कि सुन पाते हैं, बोल नहीं पाते उसमें। और अक्सर जो बच्चों में इस तरह कोई मार्कर्स, माइलस्टोन मार्कर्स जो होते हैं ना, किस एज पे बैठ रहे, आई कांटेक्ट, जैसे ऑटिज्म में ट्रैकिंग मूवमेंट्स, आई कांटेक्ट पिक होना चाहिए, इसमें भी अवेयरनेस आई। अक्सर बच्चे जो पहले 2 साल होते हैं ना, फ्रॉम 0 to 2 years, इस गैप में बच्चे पिक नहीं होते, मिस हो जाते हैं, एंड दैट इज़ द टाइम जब अर्ली इंटरवेंशन would help them, whether it's a Down syndrome baby or it's an autistic baby or it's a child with cerebral palsy. Those first 2 years are crucial कि जिस the earlier the intervention the better the results. और अक्सर वही जो 0 to 2 years का gap है वो मिस हो जाता है. 2 years पर कई समझ आती है वालिदैन को भी, स्पेशली अगर फर्स्ट टाइम पेरेंट है या कि भाई ये बच्चा सुन नहीं रहा. अगर जो बच्चा सुनेगा नहीं वो बोलेगा नहीं. और जो बच्चे अच्छा उसमें भी फिर लेवल्स हैं, जैसे मैंने कहा किस लेवल पे इंटरवेंशन होती है, किसका हल है, इलाज है विद एन इम्प्लांट या हेयरिंग एड, किसका नहीं है. अच्छा बहुत बच्चे हैं जो इतना ट्रॉमेटाइज होते हैं जो स्पीच थेरेपिस्ट के पास ले के उनको जा रहे होते हैं. It's very traumatic for them to learn to speak. I'm talking of those cases जिसमें speech possible नहीं है. उसमें focus sign language पे होना चाहिए to save them that trauma of repeating or trying to vocalize, because speech में hearing भी involved है, tongue, the jaw muscles. पास बच्चे होते हैं जिनका पैलेटल डिफेक्ट होता है, वो ऊपर सॉफ्ट पैलेट नहीं डेवलप हुआ होता या ओरल मसल्स नहीं. तो अच्छा बास बच्चे होते हैं अगर डाउन्स हैं या कोई और, वैसे भी बास बच्चे होते हैं जॉ नहीं बंद करते, मुंह नहीं बंद करते, दे हैव अ ड्रूलिंग सॉर्ट ऑफ अ गेपिंग माउथ, उनकी स्पीच अफेक्ट होती है. सिंपल थिंग्स लाइक गिविंग देम अ लॉलीपॉप, encouraging them के lollipop लेके to suck on it to strengthen their muscles, उससे काफ़ी वो हो सकते. then there मतलब different centers, every special need has to be addressed a certain way. अगर understanding है, language का barrier है, language is also a very complicated pathway. It goes through 4-5 places in the brain to produce speech as we understand. मगर उसमें समझने की ये बात है कि जैसे अगर हम फॉर एग्जांपल मैं किसी फॉरेन कंट्री में चली जाऊं वेयर आई डोंट अंडरस्टैंड देयर लैंग्वेज, मैं आई विल बी फोर्स्ड टू साइन in some way to make myself understood. In cases like those ना हमें जिद में जो accepted या conventional method है उस पे नहीं अकड़ जाना. If sign language is the answer for somebody, उसको भी सिखाएं, खुद भी सीखें. अगर कोई और इम्पेडिमेंट है, अगर राइटिंग से एक्सप्रेशन हो सकता है टू इनकरेज दैट, अगर विजुअल इम्पेडिमेंट है टू इनकरेज दैट. स्कूलों में मैं चाह रही हूँ कि हमारा कैंपेन हो कि जो अर्ली ईयर्स हैं, फॉर्मेटिव ईयर्स हैं, उनके रेगुलर आई चेकअप्स हों. बिकॉज कितने बच्चे हैं कि एक तो ये चश्मा भी स्टिग्मा है, मेरे साथ भी ऐसे हुआ है बड़ा होते हुए. मतलब अगर मैं सोशल गैदरिंग में जाती थी, चश्मा नहीं लगाओ तो फिर जाओ. आई वॉज सच अ हाई मायोप, नियर साइटेड के आई कुडंट टेल अ ट्री अपार्ट फ्रॉम अ पर्सन इफ आई डिडंट हैव माय ग्लासेस. तो मैं शायद थी, मैं पीछे जाके बैठती थी. उसके साथ पर्सनैलिटी लेबल लगने शुरू हो गए, एरोगेंट, पता नहीं क्या क्या. एंड ऑल द टाइम आई कुडंट सी. स्कूल में द क्लास परफॉर्मेंस इज अफेक्टेड. वो बच्चे ब्लैक बोर्ड उनको नज़र नहीं आता, वो नहीं सीख सकते. घर में टीवी नज़र नहीं आता, डांट खा रहे होते हैं. till somebody notices कि they're edging themselves forward. So intellectual development, it depends कि impediment किस level पे है. Cognitive है, atypical learners होते हैं, there is nothing wrong with them except कि वो पढ़ लिख सकते हैं मगर ज़रा फ़र्क अंदाज से. Dyslexics हैं, there is nothing wrong with it except we are used to using our right side of the brain. Certain people are used to using their left center side of their brain more than their right side. किसी का art strong है, math strong है, language skills इतने strong नहीं हैं. अच्छा, one assistive device अगर dyslexics के लिए एक पेन आता है, it's called a C pen. It's an electronic pen. जब line पे फेरें, it scans and reads it out to them. वही पेन मैं अभी विजुअली चैलेंज्ड लोगों के लिए, वो जितना लेवल हो कि लाइन कम से कम उनको समझ आए. सो इट कैन अप्लाई टू दैट. सो इट्स सच अ कॉम्प्लिकेटेड क्वेश्चन बिकॉज द ब्रेन is not fully understood. It works on many levels. Mother, especially kindergarten level, where the teachers have to be aware, parents, and the earlier the diagnosis, more the accurate the diagnosis not for the sake of putting a label and thrusting that child or that adolescent or adult aside for life. No, diagnosis to find the answer and the solution to make that child or that person a more viable part of society and individually independence as much as they can offer.
Okay, thank you, Zarina. We have Brother Idris Khamisa from South Africa. He is a renowned educationist, he is a renowned trainer, and I would like you to connect with him not only now, but also later, because he's working on different areas of education. And Brother Idris, I would like to introduce Dr. Zarina Hasan to you, who's a virologist, as I told you, and a molecular biologist. And she has a passion for inclusive education, and she understands the challenges of the differently abled and the diversely abled people. And she can identify, because she has been a medical doctor, because she has lost her eyesight in her 30s. So she understands those things which probably people who have not been blessed with this sight since birth might not be able to understand. So what can be done in an educational forefront in the international scenario for inclusive education? Because I'm sure it's a challenge across the world, and she has many beautiful, wonderful ideas of how to make our educational spaces more convenient, more inclusive. So if you have anything to say on this subject, you're more than welcome.
No, Jazakumullah. I must say I was very, very impressed with Dr. Zarina's presentation. What I liked most about it was basically a compassion and a care for the differently able people. I mean, we so-called able people, we never unleash our complete potential. Yet we get the differently able people who do some incredible things, and they humble us by their contribution. In fact, I really believe schools should become far more inclusive. When they become inclusive, what it does, it will help other learners to respond with empathy and compassion. I recall years ago, I had a friend of mine whose son, was born without sight. And he said to me, Idris, man, you know what? I'd like him to come to your school. I said, no problem. We'll do that. And that young boy came there and to the school. And alhamdulillah, he passed his examinations. But the critical thing is this, the other students learned to show him compassion and caring. And he himself felt normal. He did not feel that he was at a disadvantage. So, alhamdulillah, I would like to engage with Dr. Zarina, anytime, inshallah. And I think the whole idea is that we must learn to show compassion. We need to understand the nature of people, what is it they can do, and we must allow them to grow, because all of them, every child is a gift from Allah. So, and I like to believe, inshallah, that schools need to also show compassion, and they need to be a little indulgent. They mustn't judge children purely from the narrow cognitive thing in terms of academic excellence. So Jazakumullah for that.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your support and continuing guidance.